Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday, June 5th, 2020. All of our horrible situations are ongoing. Nothing has changed there. Many things to check in on. It is Friday, and so we'll have essentially 2 hours uninterrupted to explore all of these things, some of which we, I imagine, will be doubling back on and picking up, having missed the opportunity to discuss them earlier in the week, some of which will be new. Plenty brand new stuff coming through, but all relating to, well, you know, the same, essentially, same dire situations over and over again. It is Friday, and I guess today the jobs report becomes official. Yesterday's peek at the job report, I guess, is the, well, just that, an unofficial peek. We'll see where it comes down. It looks like the situation has improved slightly, but improving from, you know, negative 200, not really a fantastic place to be. We'll see how the White House reacts to that. We'll see how the markets react to that, I guess. I don't know that we'll necessarily spend time on how the markets are reacting, but there's plenty of other things to move on to. Is Trump going crazy at the moment? I guess so. I just happened to see Hank Epton and his tweet running by. Wait, did Donald Trump tweet 100-something times in the last hour? Is that possible? I didn't think his fingers could move that quickly. They're not long enough to move that fast over a keyboard, telephonic or otherwise. Let's see. I don't know. Let me go click on the guy's. I hesitate to look at his Twitter feed, but I guess it's entirely possible. What's he up to at the moment? He's screaming about the jobs report as though it was a super fantastic positive thing. And I'm sure, you know, any positive movement is certainly welcome at this stage. But, yeah, I guess he's really going crazy about having, what was it? We found out that it wasn't like 1.9 million fewer, or what was it? Some number of people fewer out of work, so that the unemployment rate was dropping from like 30% to 20%. I'm not a real close observer of the jobs numbers. They don't mean a whole lot to me, except by way of trends. But I guess that's got him excited, and he's spent the morning retweeting all of this stuff, and I don't know whether it's going to do him any good. He's on his way to Maine today, not Portland, Maine, necessarily. And in fact, I think he's on his way to rural Maine. But, well, you know, our morning tweets usually come. We import them from the wilds of Maine as it is. Portland's wild enough for all of us, I think. Daily Co's Radio is live now. Kagro X, that's me, David Waldman. Look at that. I'm in this one. He's now taking bets on whether Trump will spend his weekend golfing or bunker inspecting. Oh, the suspense. Yeah, we'll find out. I'm sure that when he spends time down there this weekend, if he finds himself trapped in the White House, he'll just be inspecting things just for everyone's safety. Not his. He'll never go down there to protect himself because he's a manly man. Remember, I did see somebody reminding us. Remember when he said that he was fairly certain that he'd be brave enough to charge into a school that was under siege from a school shooter to help root out the evildoer. And, of course, no one believed that, and, you know, brought up all the other stories about times he's run away from people who have even fallen down and injured themselves at Mar-a-Lago. He's run away from the sight of blood, I think he told us all at one point before he was president. Now, of course, he loves blood and can't get enough of it. The protests continue around the country. I am sure that there are some big ones planned for this weekend. There are even some in my little local area, which I observed one the other day. I didn't realize that there was a protest going on in our little town where Trump keeps his golf course. So I suppose it was good practice. And another coming for Saturday. I don't know whether Trump intends to get out for golf, but I did see that in the beginning part of the week, maybe the end of last week, that the Secret Service, I suppose, they're the ones responsible for this, had notified the FAA that Trump intended to fly up to New Jersey for a visit to his Bedminster, New Jersey golf course for the weekend. And I guess you got to go through a certain process and get clearances for his flight. I think he actually, if I recall correctly, when he goes up to New Jersey, helicopters out to Andrews from the White House and then takes one of the Air Force One planes, whichever one he gets on becomes Air Force One. We all know how that works. And flies up to New Jersey that way, which, I don't know what the range of the helicopters are. Maybe it makes more sense than flying the helicopter all the way up there. It's probably faster, but I don't know. I'm curious about the fuel efficiency question on all that. Anyway, he was all set to go up to Bedminster, apparently, and according to what I have from the news, they retracted that filed plan, which I guess is supposed to mean he's not going, at least to New Jersey. We'll have to wait and see whether he decides to try to sneak out for golf in Virginia, right here in Virginia, or whether he is trapped in one of those situations where he feels like presidential resolve demands that he remain in the White House. He gets the idea that the optics are just terrible. And now that the perimeter has been expanded and they've put up all this new fencing and he's got all sorts of new security measures to hide from, well, the protests of the American people. I don't know whether he pays attention to such things, but certainly the optics of helicoptering out from inside this newly fortified bunker for a day of golfing, it's just not going to look good, and there's no way, I don't think, of avoiding photos of the event being taken and disseminated around the world. So I don't know. Maybe now he'll say he's got lots of work to do in the White House instead, and I imagine that's how he'll be spending his weekend. I don't know. He's crazy enough to try just about anything, I guess, at this point, and he might prefer to shoot his way out for a round of golf or two. That's the kind of guy he is. All right, let's see. We'll switch over to pardon me, boy. We'll switch over to monitoring the Twitter feed and rummaging through what we have in Pocket, and there's an awful lot. No end of video from around the country, and in fact, I've seen one or two people compiling all the various video that's been coming in. Innumerable and untold numbers more, I'm sure, of instances of police violence and abuse in the past couple of days. It's become pretty clear to all of us. I'm not breaking any news here, I don't think. It's become pretty clear to all of us that the riots we're seeing, to the extent that there are any, are police riots, and it's sort of a national problem. We went into a little bit of how it could possibly be that even in states and municipalities controlled by even good allied progressive Democrats, police can run amok and seem to operate without much in the way of oversight or control. But people are documenting it from all over the place. And of course, the most infuriating thing about it is that the police seem to enjoy being able to operate with impunity, not only just overall, because the politicians ostensibly elected to oversee their work and control their work, analogous, I think, to the civilian control of the military on the federal level, are just afraid or unable for various reasons to exercise that kind of control. And so they do what they like, but on top of that, it's just plain abusive on a human level, not just because of the violence that's perpetrated, but by the way they do it. More and more I see in these videos, police essentially sometimes foregoing the order to protesters to actually leave or move back or whatever it is that they're supposed to be instructing them to do, and they just go immediately to the application of violence. And they'll just walk up and they're just smacking people over the heads and in the legs and elsewhere with their batons, and either you back up or you fall down because of the pain and then they drag you away, or I suppose you could stand there and try and resist it, but if you do anything like, hey, you're not supposed to be allowed to do that. That's not even a policing activity. You're just fighting me, and you can't just walk up to me and hit me with a bat and not get some resistance. But at the moment that resistance presents itself, there's a second line of cops behind them accompanying the guys with the batons, now with what look like paintball guns, but I guess they've been replaced with pepper balls instead of paint. They don't want to ruin your clothing. They just want to, gas you, essentially, and make it so painful for you to remain on this certain part of the street where they don't want you that you'll just leave on your own. I mean, I guess that's one of the big problems. In addition to the violence that they seem to think is necessary to do their job, they've been outfitted with all of these new non-lethal weapons, which some of which can be pretty lethal if applied incorrectly, or even if applied correctly, but you happen to have the bad luck to have had a cop aim at your head instead of nearby you or in wherever else it might be considered less likely to become lethal, even though it's supposed to be a non-lethal weapon. I see they've never bothered to deal with the, non-lethal, but things that don't actually do any permanent damage, like, corralling people just by itself, or, for a while there they were firing, like, nets, and it looked a little stupid, but I think they go for the things that look and feel a lot more like regular guns. But they love using the non-lethal weaponry because they think, this isn't anything I have to do any paperwork on, I can discharge this weapon without having to write it up. People get hurt and they're angry and they comply because it's too painful not to, so that's good. And as we learned really from previous demonstrations over the years, I'm hearkening back to the infamous and now tame, by comparison, pepper spray cop that we all saw on the University of California campus. Was it at Davis where we saw the student protesters just sitting on a sidewalk, blocking a sidewalk? Oh no. It's not like blocking a street. You can walk around a sidewalk and go on the grass and continue on your merry way. It's a little more difficult when they're blocking the street. But remember the cop who just casually strolled up and down the line of them and pepper sprayed them all in the face so they would leave. We did give us some attention when it happened, and it strikes me that's obviously still continuing, but with an extra measure of violence and sadism. Cops don't want to do, I guess, the hard job of actually physically removing people who are blocking the street. And I understand that there's, there's legal basis for arresting people for impeding traffic or even impeding sidewalks, probably in some municipalities. But to remove the impediment involves, one, mass arrests, and not every department is capable of executing mass arrests and doing it legally and cleanly. And two, the hard work of picking people up and separating them when they've linked arms and then moving them to transport and taking them to jail and processing them. It's difficult to constrain your arms and back when you're lifting people and dragging them. And so it became acceptable practice in the police departments, I think. The handiness of the pepper spray and the pepper ball guns and even tear gas and all sorts of other supposedly non-lethal weaponry was just really to relieve the backs and arms, the aching backs of police. I don't want to carry this person to a waiting vehicle and then cart him back and then process him and then have to deal with an overcrowded prison and do all the paperwork. I'm just going to gas them in the face and hope they give up their protest and run away. And then as it turns out, it just made people angry, and they stayed and protested even more. And then they felt like, well, maybe if I hit them over the head with a stick, they'll either run away or be unconscious, and then we can drag their unconscious bodies off of the street and let the traffic flow. Even though there's nobody going anywhere, everybody's locked down for the most part, and traffic can find its way around a blockage, finds its way around an accident, so whatever. It's been really rather remarkable to watch. Also remarkable to watch has been the degree to which the police and other citizens have fooled themselves into believing that they are under attack by Antifa super soldiers everywhere under the country. This has really been something interesting, and I caught wind of the first of these things maybe a couple days ago. And there's the tea for you. In the last couple of days, it seems to have exploded into a phenomenon all by itself. Let's see. Do I have the first instance? I probably do, and it's put away somewhere. But reports are coming in from around the country, and I think J.J. McNabb has maybe done the best service to us here by compiling some of these things. But reports have come in from all over the heartland of our nation, alleging, I guess, maybe we'll start here, alleging that rumors have surfaced in these various small towns that the police, the local constabulary, have gotten wind somehow of some super secret plans of the Antifa super soldiers to show up in this rural burg and terrorize the good people of the land and loot and burn and generally accept practices considered at odds with the heartland values of the good people of the village. Whatever, I don't really know what they're planning beyond looting and pillaging, I'm sure. And anyway, the police allegedly in these incidents become convinced of the truth of these incidents. So do the people. They pass the alarmed forwarded 15-time email chains or Facebook posts or what have you around, and it draws out a sort of Minuteman militia response. The local folks all grabbed their AR-15s, which they were sure last week that they needed in order to fight a tyrannical government that was preventing them from getting haircuts, and now have come out in, full support of the same tyrannical government that was preventing them from getting haircuts, even though they haven't actually gotten their haircut yet, because they're waiting a little while just to see if it's safe. And then guard their neighborhoods with the AR-15s against the super soldiers who never show up, or the peaceful protest of local teens and high school students, etc., who have the audacity to walk through town with hand-lettered signs on the back sides of cardboard boxes that say things like Black Lives Matter. Well, I saw, video from I don't know where, of a small, maybe 8 to 10, at least 8 to 10 visible in the video protest, 8 to 10 person teenager video of a protest walking through some nice looking suburb or exurb somewhere, only to pass along the fence line of what, I don't know whether the whole was a gated community or just a local neighborhood that had fenced off the sides of their yards against the thoroughfare there, and the kids were walking by, and the whole neighborhood association there had come out, each with their AR-15s on their harnesses and their sidearms, and stood on that side of the fence. And there's a fence between their neighborhood and where the kids were, but they needed to guard the fence in case these local kids decided to break into their own homes and loot them or something. And it was pretty disappointing. But I guess the guys with the AR-15s were all disappointed too. They didn't have anything fun to do. They didn't get to shoot anybody. Nobody gave them any excuse. There was a video camera there. They're going to be embarrassed. The whole works. But even more alarming, I guess, are these reports that J.J. McNabb has compiled. And I saw that they turned up in Idaho. They turned up in Illinois. They turned up in, I think, in Nevada and Arizona as well. Let's take a look at what she's put together here. A rumor about busloads of Antifa protesters sparked by a bogus Twitter account. Oh, no. Another one of those. Spurred, in this case, Chicago police. Big city America. So Chicago police to shut down highways and send a helicopter to the Indiana border. What? Okay. It was all completely false. And there's a link here to, what is this? Mel Magazine? I'm not even certain what that is, but it seems to, well, it kicks off the thread here. How Facebook misinformation turned a white supremacist conspiracy into police action. What? How could there be such close coordination between white supremacists and police? I don't know how that happened. A rumor about busloads of Antifa protesters sparked by a bogus Twitter account spurred Chicago police to shut down highways and send a helicopter to the Indiana border. It was completely false. Why, I just read that a moment ago. This is written by Quinn Myers. I guess it was repeated by J.J. McNabb and now by me for your edification. For the entirety of Saturday, May 30th, this goes on to say, Trish, it's just Trish, that's a person here who's following a Chicago police scanner on Twitter. Trish sat next to her police scanner, tweeting out any information she thought might be helpful to protesters in Chicago. An avid police scanner devotee, the 41-year-old figured she might be of better help to those out in the streets by reporting what she heard on the scanner. And I've heard this is a common practice at some of these protests, and very often, for whatever reason, the police don't seem particularly aware, though sometimes they say they're aware, that people are listening on police scanners to where they're deploying, and people who support the protests let the others who are on the street know where the police are deploying via Twitter or sometimes encrypted messaging apps, most of which, by the way, if you're operating in a fairly large-sized city, are being intercepted and monitored in return by the police, and maybe even now by federal authorities. So you should be aware of that. And I've seen a lot of good advice. If you're on your way to a protest and you think there's some reason for you that you might be arrested or have any sort of privacy interest, you are urged to leave your personal phone at home. You're reminded that the police do have the technology to track that phone and establish your presence at the site of the protest, should that ever come to mean anything detrimental for you, whether you are involved in something that legitimately requires a criminal trial or are there on trumped up charges or just want to protect your privacy. But they can tell that you've been there and you can establish your presence there. And although it's valuable to be able to message with and coordinate with friends and others while you're at the protest, others who are more experienced in these things urge the purchase of essentially a cheap burner phone for those purposes and the use of encrypted messaging apps. And apparently, if you happen to have access to the money, it can be done for $100 or so if you are dedicated to that. Otherwise, the advice is simply to leave the phone at home. Much better for your maintaining your privacy and much better for not giving away valuable information to the police. Recall that they are using essentially mimic cell phone towers with their Stingray devices and send out a ping type of signals that your phones will respond to because that's what they're designed to do. And from then on, they're able to identify you individually and track your movements, et cetera, and maybe even read your messages as well. We're not really 100% sure about that. Anyway, so here's Trish's tweet letting her friends know that she'll be watching what's going on via police scanner in Chicago. And I guess she must have found this fun information. Just around the time she was going to call it a night, Trish heard something come across the police radio that sounded odd. All of a sudden, there was this report of buses headed toward Illinois by way of Indiana with protesters, she tells me. Sounds really awfully unlikely, I think, and that's probably why she recognized it as kind of odd. And there's some tape, I guess, some audio of this exchange, about 38 seconds. I'll skip by playing it, but you can listen for yourself if you like. At first, she ignored it. Chicago's police radio had been hacked earlier. How do you like that? So there was already several scanner interferences with music playing or a person saying obscenities, Trish tells me. They were able to hack it. They just weren't sure what to do with it once they got it. Cody, a 24-year-old who'd also been listening to the police scanner throughout the day, adds that dispatch had largely been ignoring these interruptions, which included voices saying to use deadly force and shut the F up. But when they said 3,000 Antifa, and maybe I should listen to it just to hear how they pronounce the word. But anyway, 3,000 Antifa were on 12 buses from Indiana. Can we fit that? That seems like overcrowded buses, don't you think? 3,000 people divided by 12 buses. That's 1,500. No, that I must have divided by 2. I missed my 1, so my calculator doesn't do the job there. All right, 3,000 divided by 12, 250 Antifa super soldiers per bus. And that, I think, exceeds the capacity of just about any bus. They didn't stop and do the math, I'm sure. I think the word I heard on the invasion that was rumored in Idaho was that 6,000 Antifa super soldiers were on their way. And once again, doing the math on that, you would be able to, you know what, the astronauts on the space station would have spotted that caravan sooner than anybody else. That would be a pretty large thing. But they love the caravan excuse, right? I guess they ran out of or everybody's attention to immigrant caravans had waned. So now the threat of the moment is Antifa, so they pretend that there's a caravan of them on their way to wherever. So it goes on to say with this 3,000 person 12 bus caravan coming, Cody says they directly acknowledged it for officer safety. The whole thing seemed surreal, and it was not only surreal, it was just plain not real. But I always thought Antifa was sort of an overblown thing, definitely not a formal organization. So to imagine them moving in large numbers across state lines seemed ridiculous, and indeed it was. And then some more embedded tweets and some more on this story, and then perhaps we can do a roundup of how many places apparently let themselves or hoped to let themselves be fooled into believing such things after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. This is kind of a fascinating story, probably overblown in terms of how much time we're spending on it, but I just can't believe that this keeps happening over and over again. I'll pick up where we left off. There is an embedded tweet from one Gwen, who is a supporter of Black Lives Matter, according to the Twitter profile here, reporting Ontario ramp is remaining open for people to leave, but state police are shutting down almost everything else. Get that helicopter in the air and stop them. Don't let them off the bus. Talking about the 3,000 person group from Indianapolis. Why, if you were already in Indianapolis, would you get on a bus and go to Chicago to create havoc when Indianapolis is a perfectly fine place to create havoc? I'm not targeting Indianapolis here, and I don't condone violence and all that kind of stuff. But, Indianapolis is a fine place for a protest. Why not just stay there? And the answer is they did stay there. No one was doing this. And I can believe that idiots spread the rumor amongst themselves on Facebook. What I can't believe is that they fooled the Chicago police into believing that this was true, especially when you can get a helicopter in the air and see that it's not true pretty quickly. Anyway, independent disinformation investigator Ray Serrato. How do you like that title? I wish I was that guy. He, however, isn't surprised to hear that this happened, because I guess he deals with it all the time. The information in the recording mirrors a tweet Serrato tracked through Twitter and Facebook. It originated with the Twitter account Antifa_US. So totally official, obviously. Serrato tells me. In the Facebook data I have, the first post referencing it was in a group called Christians Praying Daily for Our President, Family, Staff, and Nation. That is what a moniker. On the night of May 30th is where it comes from. Now, here's Ray Serrato's tweet embedded in here, saying, now that Twitter has confirmed that the fake Antifa tweet originated with a white nationalist group. How do you like that? We missed that step. We could have guessed, though. Maybe Facebook should flag posts referencing it? Maybe, just maybe. The tweet circulated widely in pro-Trump groups and was then boosted by large conservative accounts. It continues to gain traction. There's a nice chart here that I guess illustrates just how much traction it got. From there, the screenshot went viral, particularly on pages and groups administered by current and former law enforcement officers, e.g., Florida Officers Resource page with 9,735 followers, the Detroit Scanner, the Detroit Police Facebook page with 41,000 something followers, and U.S. Law Enforcement with nearly 500,000 followers, a page, quote, run by several current and former law enforcement officers. So like if you've been fired as a cop because you're too violent or whatever, you might be eligible to help run this fun page. As reported by Brandy Zadrozny and Ben Collins of NBC News, the post then made its way to hyper-local services like Nextdoor and the Ring app in communities across the country, particularly rural areas. And by the way, that's another storyline I guess we could be following one of these days. If we take a turn into the what are we going to do about police and police unions and the like in the next couple of months as we confront this problem and try to find some sort of solution to things, there's another story tangential to it or adjacent to it that really about I've been seeing so many complaints and some interesting write-ups about the contributions that things like Nextdoor and the Ring app of all things, you thought this harmless idea of I'll be able to keep a lookout on my Amazon packages as they're delivered outside my door, and one time somebody stole them, and now I'll have video of the person who does it, and I can maybe get my stuff back and stop a thief. And other than that, I can control access to my door and see who's ringing my doorbell without actually having to go answer it. Seemed harmless enough. And now people are going crazy, snitching on one another and getting the identities wrong and reporting things that aren't crimes. People have turned into amateur detectives and basically are calling the cops when they see through their Ring device that, a black person drove down the street. It must be an invasion from out of state. I'll call the cops. It's getting kind of stupid out there. And Ring is apparently part of the problem. I don't know if by itself it's just inherently part of the problem or people are just misusing it, but another thing that needs addressing somewhere along the line. By June 1st, several local police departments in states like Idaho and South Dakota were definitely aware of this rumor, but by that point there was enough evidence to consider it unsubstantiated, though apparently not for Fox News and Donald Trump, because they're, of course, invested in believing it. Here is embedded Donald Trump Jr.'s retweeting of a, I guess, screenshot of the Antifa_US Twitter account saying alert with little siren emojis there, or police beacon emojis. Tonight's the night, comrades, because that's the way we all talk to each other. Then a little fist emoji. Tonight we say, and they use some salty language here, F the city. That's what they say. That's what people are always saying to one another. F the city. And we move into the residential areas, the white hoods, and not the white hoods that people wear, but rather the white neighborhoods where they live, you see. Okay, anyway, we move into the white hoods, and we take what's ours, and then a fire emoji, and then a hashtag. 2 hashtags. One being Black Lives Matters, although they misspelled it. That's an interesting thing. This one actually reads Black Lives Maters, which is, I'm not certain what to make of that one, but really that's their own business. And if Black lives want to mate, who's going to stand in their way? Honestly, we're supposed to be for that sort of private relationship in this country. But then the next one, remember, we don't like this country, because the next hashtag is the very common F America hashtag with a middle finger emoji afterwards. So lots of people are hashtagging their tweets F America these days, I'm sure. Anyway, Donald Trump Jr. Oh, this must be on Facebook or Instagram. It makes it look like it, not quite a Twitter look to it. John Trump Jr. saying, absolutely insane. Just remember what Antifa really is. It's nothing. A terrorist organization. They're not even pretending anymore, except they are pretending. Well, they're not pretending. It's a white supremacist group pretending to be Antifa, pretending to not pretend anymore, or something like that. Maybe I had one too many pretends in there. By June 2nd, a whole day later, Facebook moved to label the tweet as containing false information. My goodness, thank you for helping on that one. Long after Twitter suspended the account for calls to violence and disclosed that it was run by a white nationalist group, Identity Europa. Wah, wah. Oh, well. Didn't turn out to be true. Absolutely insane. That's true. That's a quote there. Donald Trump Jr. says, Identity Europa are absolutely insane. Let's get the word out. Stepping back to the night of May 30th, though, in fairness, days before the post caught enough attention to be debunked, Chicago Police, the police department wasn't, I would otherwise have said Chicago police weren't, but not a group of individual police officers, but the organization wasn't quite sure what to do with the information. Was it legitimate? Or was it the same troll they'd been ignoring all night? Duh. But okay, they're confused. According to William Spellman, a professor of public affairs at the University of Texas, 911 operators are trained to identify false calls, but I don't know of anything specific to the internet crime reporting issue. That is, while most crimes are reported by victims or witnesses over the phone, he's not sure of any places that have specific protocols regarding crimes reported on social media. In many places, it's also perfectly permissible to report through Facebook or another social media platform, he continues. In almost all cases, police will follow up in person or over the phone to verify the facts and to verify that a crime was in fact committed. When reached for comment on whether Chicago Police Department has such a protocol in place for internet crime reporting, a representative didn't say either way. Our officers respond to thousands of calls for service every day, and sometimes those calls are related to information gathered via the internet or social media. They write via email. That information is then relayed to our officers in the field, and they're investigated. Spellman says some police departments do undergo training in this realm, be it through the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center or a private company. All right. No comment. Such training covers credibility assessments and rumor control, especially regarding natural disasters, and somebody who's gone through it would probably be in a better position to separate fact from fiction. Those who haven't, though, might be just as likely to mistake a tweet from an account such as Antifa US as anyone else. That said, this particular anyone else, like the president's son, all right? That said, this particular tweet had all the hallmarks of being fake. The account misspelled a legitimate hashtag as Black Lives Matters. And inside the Antifa flag in the profile picture, the account is appended an IE, short for Identity Europa, which rebranded as American Identity Movement in 2019. Is that right? So inside the Antifa logo, such as it is, they put their IE in there. But again, none of that stopped it from spreading in Chicago on Saturday night. At 10:25 p.m., an hour after the buses were first mentioned, what sounds like a different voice brought them up again, and the dispatcher acknowledged she didn't know where the information was coming from, but was taking action on the report to ensure the safety of officers. She also noted that a police helicopter had been rerouted from the protest to the Indiana state line to watch for the buses. And maybe that's a good thing, but all right. Within the chatter, another voice chimed in to clarify that the Indiana State Police says there's nothing to the story about the buses. Nevertheless, the helicopter was on its way. And here's some tracking radar showing the flight path of the helicopter. The report of buses headed towards Chicago continued to pervade police chatter throughout the night as it was brought up at least 2 more times between 10:16 and 10:46 p.m. Here is the embedded tweet of Indiana Antifa super soldier caravan believer who works under the handle of Lib Crusher. What's this all about? All right, well, anyway, I am still in disbelief that Chicago police shut down expressways and sent a police helicopter to the state line in the middle of a riot, I see where he's coming from, to intercept a rumored caravan of Indiana Antifa super soldiers. The CPD rep says they don't have any specific information available about the incident. However, Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot confirmed it happened and expressed her displeasure during Wednesday's press conference. Given the nature of how misinformation spreads, it's not surprising to see similar reports of a busload of protesters pop up on other police scanners, and when those protesters don't show, it's only because the police stopped them. Or the local militia with their AR-15s, right? In Iowa, people on scanner duty have noted a bus full of Antifa protesters being mentioned on the radio. Police in Oregon reportedly sent a text message to residents warning about the same bus. And as of 10:30 p.m. last night, the bus was apparently headed back to Indiana. All the way to Oregon from Indiana, eh? Since considerable time and resources have been dedicated to a made-up story posted on a fake Antifa Twitter account created by white supremacist groups, hopefully this all leads to greater literacy about online conspiracy theories among law enforcement. But until then, we're left to rely on Trish and the others who love to pass the time by sitting and listening to police scanners. There are a lot of fake tweets and posts that people like me are happy to fact check. She says, I'm just doing what I can from my position to get the word out. Well, nicely done. And thanks to Quinn Myers, who has written this thing up for us. It's been really interesting watching this circulate and expand. J.J. McNabb, as I said, who's a fantastic reporter on the militia movement and sovereign citizen movement and all sorts of other interesting groups of wackos, put this together. First, there was the tweet that pointed us to Mel Magazine, and then it continues here. Unloads of unloads. I guess that's a autocorrect. Busloads is what it should be. Busloads of Antifa has been a thing for several days on Facebook. I'll post some examples. Here's one from a Facebook user by the name of Sean Hancock from yesterday, 9 a.m. The sheriff department said everything was quiet last night despite multiple sources confirming at least 2 buses with Antifa protesters were, I guess, a lot of, it's difficult to read raw Facebook posts, were seen headed to Petal, P-E-T-A-L. I'm not even certain where they are here in all this, but Petal, or whether they pronounce it differently. Anyway, if they were, I'd like to believe the social media involvement of citizens announcing that they were armed and ready had something to do with deterring these protesters. I'm sure you would like to believe that. Thanks for help getting the word out. This video has now been viewed. There's no video visible to me, but their video has been viewed 15,000 times, and many other people were making posts updating the situation. If Antifa was on the way, I have to believe all of your comment and posts help. Good job, Petal. And in a 10:30 p.m. update, I just talked to the sheriff department. They are on it. It's only rumors thus far. If it becomes something, they will be met with force. Wow. How scary and whatnot. Oh, yes. Oh, I see. Things are in reverse chronological order here. So it begins Tuesday, 6/2, possible buses of Antifa en route, not en route, but en route to Petal, Mississippi. Okay. Lock and load. Be safe. Well, to be safe, don't lock or load or anything, but okay. And then the 10:32 p.m. update is 10:32 Tuesday night. I just talked to the sheriff's department. It's only rumors. And then a quick update on Wednesday. They never showed, and it's because I said lock and load. It's very self-congratulatory. There's another one here. The next one J.J. McNabb puts together. And this one, really, I just got to get off this story. It's just crazy. You understand these people are idiots. But just in case you thought that there was no reason to connect my 2 current favorite stories, this and the ongoing coronavirus pandemic, let's do that. Here's a Facebook post from Marta Gillette, who is posting to the Reopen South Florida Facebook group, which you would think would be defunct by now because they're open. But they're hanging together, and lo and behold, the Venn diagram of people who are stupid enough to believe that a busload or 20 busloads of Antifa super soldiers are coming for them and their, hobby lobbies and whatnot. They overlap directly with the Reopen crowd and everything else you've ever heard about what these idiots believe. Here's her note from May 30th at 7:30 in the morning. George Soros paid Antifa goons bust in to create havoc, so the people beg for martial law. They're begging for martial law. This is the Reopen South Florida group. It says they're begging for martial law. This is amazing. Why? In order to feel safe when it is a trap, which is when the trap continues to close or just snaps shut. Boom. Welcome to slavery. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so she's thrown us a curveball here. She's reminding everybody if you beg for martial law, you might get it, and then you're slaves. But then, I guess, goes and begs. I don't know. I'm not even certain what to make of this. All right. That would mean there would be new management. Remember that Orwellian new abnormal. They're being seeded into your brains. This scatterbrained idiot is making no... I can't even follow what this person's doing. Just remember, the beatings will continue until morale improves. This is orchestrated. That line about the beatings will continue until morale improves has nothing to do with any of this. It's it's a dumb dad joke sort of a thing that you might have seen on, I don't know, for sale on a t-shirt in Key West or something, wherever. I got no idea where it comes from and what it's supposed to mean. What I know it isn't is a comment on police beatings. But they saw the word beatings, and so I don't know. This is so dumb. So anyway, watching the MSM breathlessly talking yada 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 all day long about this, that I guess this is supposed to say that is, but it comes out dice, how they capital B brainwash you with their narrative, which is stray V, just a V in the middle of things. You know how you're hitting the space bar and you hit the V, which is V, how they get you to consent to V, their aberrant acts. Remember, period. All caps, we do not consent, period. Cops stand by and do nothing in the midst of mayhem. Well, this person is barely literate and barely functional. But I just thought I'd illustrate for you that there may be some overlap between idiots who believe that there's no such thing as coronavirus, but there are such things as 30 bus caravans of Antifa super soldiers headed to Petal, Mississippi, or wherever the hell else. There's one more here. Let's see. Where's the location? Show Low, Arizona. Is that right? Is it in the news again? Or is that Nevada? Show Low. This is from the Trump store. The Trump store, whatever that is, has been notified that we are targeted by Antifa. They are busing some people in from California sometime today. Show Low Police Department has notified us early on and is watching carefully the store and these protesters when they show up today. 3 exclamation points. That's what it reads. Everyone stay safe and be careful out there. Also, they have a National Guard armored personnel carrier. Oh, it didn't say carrier. I'm sorry. They have a National Guard, no caps, armored personnel staged right outside Show Low, ready to go. So that's how we were deploying our military at the moment. On the lookout for phantom buses of Antifa super soldiers. There's another one. I'll stop reading all the whole things. Let's see. Dean Terrell posts to Facebook. Can I identify where they are? Yeah. It doesn't say where they are, but I guess it gives us a more flavor here. Y'all keep living in those big cities, with capitals, that people come to from other places, causing chaos. We'll stay in the small area we live in that carries guns and protects each other. We are expecting a busload of Antifa idiots in a town about 50 miles away. If they make it past the National Guard watching the roads coming in, they will be dealing with local police and fully, capital F, fully armed citizens who care about their community. I I will say it's been a good investment. Whoever put 2 minutes into pretending that there were busloads of Antifa super soldiers on the way to every small town in America wasted the time of every idiot in small town America. But they might not consider it a waste of time. It's an opportunity to take out an AR-15 and put in a magazine and rack around and walk around with your finger extended to show how tactical you really are. Well, anyway, it goes on and on. I don't even know how many entries there are, but I think you get the point. They're all over the country. People spent their nights, sleepless nights, patrolling local roads that hardly anyone ever drives for any reason, looking out for Antifa super soldier caravans so large they could be spotted from space, and everyone was disappointed. And they all think that the reason they didn't show up was their armed resistance intimidated these super soldiers. What a bunch of super soldiers they are, eh? Well, I guess they got to give themselves something to do. They've been locked in their houses for some time, even though they went to all the reopen protests and should be, at this point, well back on the road to recovery, except, the place they're returning to was a realm of relative mental incapacity to begin with. So I guess there's not much hope of their improving. All right. People are losing their minds all over the place. And I guess another fun weekend story will be the hunt and the debunking of some of the rumors swirling around the hunt for the jackass bicyclist in Bethesda, Maryland, who many of you no doubt saw jumping off of a bicycle in order to assault 2 young girls who were distributing leaflets dealing with the Black Lives Matter movement materials, and specifically referencing George Floyd's death. And I don't know whether they were organizing for a protest or what, but you probably saw it by now. The guy jumps off his bicycle and attempts to forcibly remove the leaflets from the hands of these 2 girls, one of whom appears to be like maybe 11 or 12 years old, which is incredible. And they got pretty good video pictures of him, and they're tracking the guy down. And they hand it over to the area police. They're looking for the guy. I mean, assuming he's not one of them, off duty, I suppose. And there was some interesting leads generated last night, but I'm not certain that they pan out. I've been looking at the Twitter feed of Hunter Walker, White House correspondent for Yahoo News, who says that he, among others, last night identified a person who matches the description of the cyclist who allegedly assaulted the girl through a tipster. They aren't, not the tipster, but the person identified, aren't answering their phone, but they are deleting social media in real time. I passed on the info to authorities and requested an update. And it goes on to say, there's no need, by the way, to share anyone's name or info on the internet. Let the pros do their thing. And it's a good idea. I believe the authorities have the information they need. I need to get back to other work, but I cannot stress enough, he continues, that no one should be tweeting anyone's name in conjunction with the Bethesda cyclist incident on Crescent Trail. The police have gotten some great info. Nothing is confirmed. Innocent people can get hurt with doxing, and it's a good reminder. And as it turns out, there's more than one person that the same type of otherwise pretty solid information would indicate might be the guy. As it turns out, one of the another good warning against the Internet of Things, the smart device revolution will do us all in. It's going to kill us all in the end. This person who was identified first, and then another person identified later, were apparently given up by the smart devices that they wear when they go on their bike rides. They're big bike nerds, and they measure the distance that they've ridden, and even like the power output that they generate when they're biking. And so it traces your route and tells you all sorts of things, all sorts of data and information about your ride. I'm sure it's very handy and everything. But one of the things it will do will map you in real time and geolocate you. And guess what? Here's a picture of a guy who looks kind of like that guy that's captured in video. And the internet tells us that he rode on that trail at that time. Wow. Whoops. That's a big problem for that guy, and then he made a stop right in that area for a few minutes and then jumped back on the bike and took off. And then he suddenly the internet record of that ride is deleted and his social media begins to disappear, et cetera, et cetera. But as it turns out, there's at least one other person who has the same criteria, who also was in the area and stopped at about that time on a bike ride. Although then somebody else pointed out that maybe even the first person's map, though it goes over that area, maybe the time wasn't right. It's really amazing. But it's pretty incredible. And Hunter goes on to say, I'm aware of multiple credible leads. Please call the tip line if you think you know the person's name. Don't tweet it. And then goes on to say, I didn't want to acknowledge all the tweets naming this guy to add fuel to the fire, but I just saw that he posted this. The first person whose name came up in connection with all this. He posted this. I also independently spoke to a former neighbor of his who contacted me to say they are positive it's not him in the clip. This person tweets out last night, I recently learned I've been misidentified in connection with a deeply disturbing attack. Please know this was not me. I have been in touch with the authorities and will continue to help in any way possible. And Hunter concludes, this is why you must wait for confirmation. There is an independent thing I sent in after working with a tipster. The person matches the description, including some of the bike gear, unlike this guy, and the first guy, and seems to have deleted things online that could have linked them. So now there's word that there's a second person who matches the description and has in their profile even more identifying photos. So, better lead, but I guess it just goes to show you, I don't mind the internet sleuthing for sure, but I think really the first thing you got to keep in mind is that I guess I would say there are authorities who are supposed to take care of these things. However, those authorities are involved in nationwide riots at the moment and spending most of their time clubbing people over the head, even when they're trying to help. I guess the other big viral video of the night came out of Buffalo, doesn't have anything to do with this incident, but where Buffalo police shoved a protester to the ground and he fell backwards and basically cracked his head open on the sidewalk behind him. And it's really kind of horrific video because you see him bleeding onto the sidewalk, and then you see the cops sort of briefly stop and look and say, I think I might have killed that guy, and then march on. But then everything gets thrown into disarray. The march ceases, and they have to go and take care of this guy. And as it turns out, sleuths who were looking at the video all night found that the guy was approaching the police. Why? You always wonder about why are you approaching the police? He had one of their helmets in his hand, and he was returning one of their protective helmets to them, and they still did this. They just, I guess, love it. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show, and let's just hop right into it. I missed my first couple seconds. One more tweet I found. I guess this is the first one I finally ran into, and I found it by scrolling through the pocket here from Matthew Randazzo. Okay. Just a random sort of fellow on the internet here. Though he is an author, so I suppose you should look into and perhaps buy his books if they tickle your fancy. Author on organized crime and government, plus police corruption, public policy, etc., and a consultant for Washington State's Indian tribes. Very interesting. But he points out what he found in, what is this? Is this, I don't know which of the social media platforms this is. Developing, he writes, in the tiny remote town of Forks, Washington. Locals on Facebook, there we go, are claiming they blocked the highway out of fear that an incoming bus was an Antifa bus of looters come to burn down the town and then chased and harassed the bus through town while repeatedly talking guns. So, in this case, it is alleged at the outset that a bus did in fact show up. Well, what's the story on this thing? Well, I'll tell you. First, though, we'll take a look at these Facebook pictures. One from Crystal Harney, who says, protect your town, hashtag Forks Strong. And it is a picture of it looks like it might even be a bus coming down the road, but the road is blocked with tree branches. very strongly powerful tree branches that are going to stop the Antifa super soldiers. So they actually, I guess, spotted a vehicle that could theoretically be a bus. It's very far away. I can't tell exactly what's going on. Then some conversation between people who, identify themselves on Facebook. Please someone enlighten me. What did they do? Asks Tina Franklin. Riley Beglinger says, Tina Franklin, keep asking this question because people don't know, and that's the problem. Another participant says, I'm so confused. Did they say they were here to protest? Was there a gun pulled? And then finally someone else says, nope, literally camping. That is all. Somebody came to town in a camper or a Winnebago and wanted to go camping. And the locals chased them out because they might be Antifa super soldiers in a bus or a Winnebago or something. Anyway, that's really the point, isn't it? Let's see. Here's one participant in the conversation, Carrie Robbins, who says, this makes me happy. I love our locals and feel pretty damn safe. And someone answers Carrie and says, my locals are making me feel unsafe, saying they want to shoot protesters. That makes me feel unsafe too, but so would unfriendly protesters pulling a gun on someone who lives here as soon as they got here. Where are all these unfriendly protesters? Unless you saw those people committing crimes and protesting, they're not protesters. I would like some more information on the situation, Bob. Even the reasonable people are just kind of annoying. Anyway, this is obviously also quite problematic. And Matthew Randazzo has some updates here. He says, I'm now receiving reports from locals that pickup trucks of vigilantes surrounded the bus at the grocery store where they went to buy groceries for camping, and to intimidate it, the bus and the people in it, I suppose, and then patrolled the streets all night. I'm hearing multiple reports that this began with a wingnut gun dealer who posted a video about an Antifa invasion, marshaling all the goofy troops for a violent showdown with a bus of peaceful protesters that was escorted by cops. I won't share the name until I get confirmation. And do we get confirmation that it's even a bus full of protesters? Because it seems it's not. This half-ass attempt, it next says, at stoking a race war in the rainforest originated with Fred's Guns in Sequim, Washington, Sequuim, Sequim, Washington. He's posted multiple heavy-breathing, red-cheek excuse videos once the cops visited him. Please send original screen captures of deleted posts. And he continues. And now he's claiming a video where he allegedly screamed, "Ice, ice, ice," at ostensibly Hispanic protesters. He says his screaming "ice" was just an innocent command to his dog somehow. So this is the sort of guy who's circulating this rumor. Let's see if we can get down to, there's more down here. I'm trying to figure out what's the best bits to include here. Well, anyway, Fred's Guns, that's the guy. And apparently he's at the heart of the problem here. While you're here, let's see. This is about the indigenous peoples that he works with. It's unrelated, but perhaps you should check into it if you want. I'll show you his Twitter feed later on. Let's see. Another update. The victimized vigilante from Fred's Guns cut a MAGA guy in sunglasses in his car video, thanking armed militia who all night at his house and business all night, again, to protect him from the incoming Antifa attacks he was monitoring on their secret group. So, I guess now, recap, it says, small-town gun dealer with a 3% patch, a 3%er, right, makes up secret intel about incoming Antifa attacks. I'm surprised at how terribly people write in their panicky states. I mean, I make mistakes on Twitter too, but it's really tough to read people's raw Twitter feeds. It says here, makes up secret intel from about incoming Antifa attacks, causes mayhem and paranoia in 2 small towns, blocked roads, militia patrols, and racist counter-demonstrations. Cops politely make him take down post. He claims victimhood. 2020, he says. So, one more update, or a few more updates here. Now it becomes clear what actually happened. Turns out a multiracial family of 4 was out camping who was accosted. It wasn't a bus full of Antifa super soldiers. It was a camper full of 4 members of the same family, but a multiracial family, importantly, out camping. So they were accosted, harassed, and followed out of Forks, Washington by armed vigilantes who accused them of being Antifa and blocked the road out of town by falling trees. I guess by felling trees is the way you would put that, but or maybe they took fallen trees and put them in the way, but it looks like they cut down trees, blocked the road. By the way, if you're going to confront them with armed militia, how dare you come to our town? Why would you block the road out of town? And of course, that's an indication that you plan to do something yourself. All right. Linda Chapman, thank you very much for chiming in. Tells me it's Squim is the actual pronunciation for the town that is spelled Sequim. But I guess, leave it to white Americans to come up with that one. So Squim. All right, I'll believe you on that. That's dumb sounding enough to be true. Wow. All right. Well, anyway, imagine this. So now my question is, look at what this does to the town. Right now, Forks, Washington is the town that comes out with guns and pickup trucks to harass any multiracial people who come to town, and then blocks their path out of town with trees and tree branches, which I guess is supposed to mean that they're getting ready to lynch you. I don't really know. Although, I guess if they cut down all the trees, they're going to have to find somewhere else to do it. They hadn't thought that one all the way through. Maybe they just intend to shoot them. So yeah, there's an attached news story about it now if you want a more formal type of report in the Peninsula Daily News. Family harassed in Forks after being accused of being members of Antifa, I guess. High school students help them. That's good news. And then unconfirmed. How do you like this? An unconfirmed rumor from 11 hours ago. I have personal intelligence, Matthew says, that a Forks City councilman was part of the vigilante mob that accosted this mixed race family. More when I can confirm. Let's see. Any more confirmations? Lead. Let's see. Much of the confrontation and led, or is he's trying to say that this person led it, but spells it like the element led? Much of the confrontation and later organizing of the vigilantes who terrorized mixed-race families sounds like it occurred at the parking lot of the Thriftway grocery store in Forks, which is under blanket surveillance camera coverage. In such a small town, that means the grocery store has a video that can identify every single participant. And now something breaking. Criminal investigations have opened into Forks, Washington vigilante mob that terrorized the mixed-race family based on rumors of Antifa invasions spread by this gives me the chance to say it, Squim, Washington gun store owner. Forks residents were proudly bragging about the event on Facebook, comparing it to the Purge. More screen grabs from the Forks forum. And this goes on for some time now at this point. Seth Larson, another Squim Washington gun dealer who started the Antifa invasion rumors, unless Seth owns Fred's Guns. I guess that could be the same guy. Why it's called Fred's Guns? I don't know. Maybe he bought the store. Let's see. Yeah, right. Well, here's screen caps that show that Seth had something to do with it. This goes on for too long for me to continue working on this, but I guess the newspaper report will have to suffice. I'll let you read that over the weekend on your own, so I can move on to some of the other things. The other thing riling everybody, I guess the East Coast set is upset about, and rightfully so, Tom Cotton's fascist op-ed, which you would have heard about by now, I am sure. And I did have a nice request from our friend Gil, who asked whether there was any chance of a New York Times rant by Armando on this thing. But I don't know that Armando is interested and available for it. But suffice to say that in his absence, I will say that he would say that the New York Times, he would, in his raspy voice, the New York Times is an awful newspaper. I can't really do an Armando. I can do this, though. I do have an Armando sound effect. He would be driving his car when he called us and then almost have an accident, but not quite, thankfully. He stays safe. He's a relatively safe driver, I think, despite the sound effect that we got from that one call. By the way, I guess if the question looms, would I have accepted his call? Everybody knows that if he calls in on Skype it makes an annoying ring sound, or sometimes people might think it's a very pleasant ring sound. They might have come to associate it with fun people calling in to share their views on the show. But it happens, and it keeps ringing like that until I answer. So everybody knows, you got to answer the phone when it rings, right? So you can't just let that annoying noise go on. So I would answer the phone, and then after that, whatever happens, happens. It's beyond my control. Anyway, I'm sure he would tell you New York Times is awful, and you should cancel your subscription. I have mixed feelings about that, but I do feel like they really go out of their way to be awful very frequently. You know about this. Tom Cotton wrote in an op-ed that they printed for some reason that was basically, I think he titled it, or maybe they titled it, "Send in the Troops." And it was essentially a call for bringing the military to bear against the protesters for, there's no real reason to do that. It's an insane assertion. He's spent the last couple of days saying not only should you send the military in, but you should offer no quarter to the protesters, which then he went back and forth over whether or not he was really saying no quarter. And people were pointing out, well, you're a military guy. That's the basis for your entire career. You ought to know that, declaring that no quarter will be offered is actually a war crime. Well, I'm only kidding, and I'm using it in the colloquial sense and not the war crime sense, but the Merriam-Webster dictionary sense. That was what he brought to his defense. Anyway, it was a terrible thought to begin with. The op-ed itself was stupid and inflammatory, and then began the intellectual debate over whether or not it's censorship to say that the New York Times shouldn't be wasting their space and their ink on proto-fascist garbage, from a senator who, gosh, how could he possibly ever find himself heard on the national level? So, of course, the newspaper has to open itself up to him. Anyway, I won't even get into the debate necessarily. I'll let other people handle it. As a matter of fact, there's some good writing on it, and I was interested in some of the excerpts from this piece that I saw tweeted around this morning from Michelle Goldberg, an opinion columnist at the Times, now pushing back on the opinion column that the Times printed the other day. Tom Cotton's fascist op-ed, how should opinion pages respond to the right's authoritarian turn? Sounded interesting, right? Before Donald Trump became president, most newspaper op-ed pages sought to present a spectrum of politically significant opinion and argument, which they could largely do while walling off extremist propaganda and incitement. The Trump presidency has undermined that model because there's generally no way to defend the administration without being either bigoted or dishonest. And this is, I thought, a good encapsulation of the problem, and it captures it very well. The difficulty arises, and this is the same difficulty that Twitter and Facebook have. The guy is alleged to be president of the United States, and when he says things, it is news. That's kind of the old model of how things work. And what Trump, of course, has done is hack this model. He knows that television coverage and newspaper coverage, and then by the same token, these social media coverages and these platforms that are available to him are going to be loath to cut him off because of that old model and that old ingrained understanding, which was, of course, always based on the fact that a United States president was a vetted type of individual. And, you only made it to that level after a certain amount of scrutiny. And then, of course, there were limits and there are things that you should be too embarrassed to do as president of the United States, none of which applies to Donald Trump. And he knows it and he's aware of it. And he can, and he's aware that he can hack this system, and it makes him sound too savvy, but he's got an innate understanding of the fact that no one is saying no to him. And of course, he has ingrained in him part of this understanding too, that what the president says gets printed and what the president says goes. He believes, of course, the president's power is limitless because he's never bothered to understand it. And for the most part, the orders issued by presidents in the past have been followed because they've largely been lawful orders, or at least go through some sort of process to determine whether they are or aren't. He just throws out whatever he feels like and loses in court, and sometimes, though, gets his way for the moment until the courts do anything. But yeah, Michelle's got a good point here. The model that usually weeds out the extremist stuff. Why doesn't Vermin Supreme get a byline for an opinion piece in the Washington Post or the New York Times? And the answer is, well, he's just some guy. He's an extremist. But if by some miracle he were elected president, would you be able to block his materials from being printed as op-eds? And I guess presumably the answer is no, except, of course, we would have come to the conclusion that Vermin Supreme was an extremist weirdo before anything else. And apparently we skipped that step, some of us, with Donald Trump, even though it was very obvious from the beginning. And so what you have here is a system that says, well, we've got to have, quote unquote, both sides of the situation represented here. So, the marketplace of ideas has got to play out. And when one side discovers that they get a free pass to the marketplace of ideas, and so it doesn't matter if what they say is extremist, outrageous, bigoted nonsense that's dangerous to the country or even to targeted individuals named in these pieces, whatever, it has to be printed regardless. Now, you can rebut it, but the point is it gets printed, and that's a hack of the system. I think that's a good point. Opinions sections, she continues, eager to maintain ideological diversity without publishing lies or stuff that belongs in Breitbart, have therefore filled up with anti-Trump conservatives. As a result, newspapers like this one have often been criticized for elevating an intellectual clique, I guess is the way we actually say that, but it looks like clique, I know, but I've always thought that was the wrong pronunciation, but a clique in American English, that has little mass base or political influence. All right, that's a separate problem. So I can sort of appreciate my boss's decision on Wednesday to run Senator Tom Cotton's screed, arguing that the military should be sent to American cities, on buses, as it happens, to restore order, which has caused a rebellion inside the New York Times. Just an aside, yes, they are in fact arriving on buses. I saw it, chartered buses of troops arriving in D.C. I believe they said 10 buses, and they're staying in hotels in D.C., in the Marriott hotels, which I presume is still okay under the Third Amendment because it's not anybody's home. I thought it was really weird. And apparently Mike Lee, Senator Mike Lee, was tweeting that there was this terrible injustice being done to them because the mayor of D.C. was, he said, kicking them out of the hotels. I'm not certain what the situation is and what ability the mayor has to kick people out of hotels or what, especially if they're federalized National Guards. But I don't think the Third Amendment comes into it. But I thought it was an odd thing, and he was very overwrought about it. He said they had come from 10 states across the country to, I guess he thought to restore order in D.C., but order actually is just fine in D.C. And I don't really know what the big deal is either, right? They're not homeless, right? They came from 10 states. So good news. There's 10 states ready and happy to receive them back and might even put them in hotels there. I don't see why they need to stay in a hotel in Washington, D.C. Nobody needs them here. And if the mayor has the ability to oust them, so be it. All right. Anyway, back to this story. But I was amazed that they came on chartered buses. I always thought, I guess, that the military had their own transportation to wherever they had to have a battle. This was, after all, a battle space, right? According to the Secretary of Defense, as inappropriate as the term was, the idea that you have to charter a Trailways bus to get the Army wherever it's going is a little disconcerting. I thought that they had better and dedicated transportation. But I'm glad that some local charter operator is making some money, I guess. We got to get the economy going again, don't you know? Anyway, so Michelle, she was saying she can sort of appreciate the boss's decision to run Tom Cotton's stupid story. The Times opinion section wants to include the views of people who support Trump, which they, because they feel like they have to stick to the old template, and they really don't, but they feel that way. And the very qualities that make Cotton's op-ed revolting, his strongman pretensions, his sneering apocalypticism. Is that right? Okay. And all those things make him an important figure in Trump's Republican Party. He might someday come to lead it, in fact, she adds parenthetically. Readers should grasp what people like Cotton are arguing, not because it's worth taking seriously, but because it is being taken seriously, particularly by our mad and decomposing president. Cotton has made an even more extreme version of the case for military occupation of American cities on Twitter. but most Americans aren't on Twitter. The paper could convey his views by reporting on them, but for the opinion section, letting him express them himself is more direct. In the past, the Times op-ed page has offered space to enemies of the United States, including President Vladimir Putin of Russia and Sirajuddin Haqqani, deputy leader of the Taliban. Remember them? Okay. Arguing that its readers are served by access to their perspectives. Haqqani is the second in command of the Taliban at a time when its negotiators are hammering out an agreement with American officials in Doha that could result in American troops leaving Afghanistan. That makes his perspective relevant at this particular moment, the Times spokeswoman argued in response to outrage over his op-ed in February. By the way, guess who was probably outraged over that op-ed? Probably Tom Cotton, among others. A similar case, though, could be made for hearing from Cotton, an enemy of liberal democracy who has the president's ear. He's relevant whether we like it or not. Soon after this piece was published, Trump retweeted it. As a matter of fact, his piece, that is, Cotton. Thus, when I first saw the Cotton op-ed, I wasn't as horrified as perhaps I should have been. I figured he'd helpfully revealed himself as a dangerous authoritarian. But as I've seen my colleagues' anguished reaction, I've started to doubt my debating club approach to the question of when to air proto-fascist opinions. Putin and Haqqani, after all, weren't given space in this newspaper to advocate attacks on Americans during moments of national extremis. Cotton, by contrast, is calling for what would almost certainly amount to massive violence against his fellow citizens, an overwhelming show of force to disperse, detain, and ultimately deter lawbreakers. That's his quote. In a racist inversion, he equates his fantasy of soldiers putting down an uprising triggered by police brutality against black people with previous presidents using the military to enforce desegregation. His argument is frequently slippery and dishonest. The claim that police officers bore the brunt of the violence is hard to square with countless videos of police instigation. So far, more civilians than police officers have been reportedly killed during the uprising. Cotton notes that President George H.W. Bush sent federal troops into Los Angeles in 1992 to quell the riots that broke out after the police who beat Rodney King were acquitted. But he doesn't tell readers that Bush did so at the invitation of California's governor. That's very different from the federal government overriding local elected authorities and occupying their states and cities, which seems to be what Cotton is proposing. It's an idea that appalls many military leaders. As James Mattis, Trump's first defense secretary, made clear in his scathing condemnation of the president, we must reject any thinking of our cities as battle space that our uniformed military is called upon to, quote, dominate. At home, we should use our military only when requested to do so on very rare occasions by state governors. Many people at the Times, including several in the opinion department, reacted to the Cotton op-ed by tweeting, running this puts all black people in danger, including New York Times staff members. That took courage. The culture at the Times frowns on intramural criticism. The journalism industry is in free fall, and working here often feels like being on the last boat out of a burning harbor. It is not a small thing to risk one's seat on it. The danger my colleagues have tweeted about is real. All across America in the last week, peaceful protesters and journalists have been brutalized by police officers in the name of law and order. Anyone who has ever seen a military occupation up close should know how much uglier it can get. That includes Cotton, who on Twitter called for no quarter for insurrectionists, anarchists, rioters, and looters. As David French, a conservative writer who is, like Cotton, a veteran of the war in Iraq, pointed out, no quarter orders, which means showing the enemy no mercy even if they try to surrender, are a war crime. So the value of airing Cotton's argument has to be weighed against the message the Times sends in this incendiary moment by including it within the bounds of legitimate debate. Everyone agrees that the Times draws those boundaries. The question is where. I could be wrong, but I don't believe the Times would have published a defense of family separation by former Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen during the height of that atrocity, or a piece by the senior Trump aide Stephen Miller about the necessity of curbing non-white immigration. In both cases, I'm pretty sure the liberal inclination to hear all sides would have smacked up against sheer moral abhorrence. It's important to understand what the people around the president are thinking, but if they're honest about what they're thinking, it's usually too disgusting to engage with. This creates a crisis for traditional understandings of how the so-called marketplace of ideas functions. It's a subsidiary of the crisis that has the country on fire. All right. I think that sums things up nicely. We only got about a few seconds here before the alarm goes off for our early warning on our break music. But let's see. If you're still confused for whatever reason, there is a Vox explainer on this, as there is on most things. The real problem with the New York Times op-ed page is it's not honest about U.S. conservatism. Slightly different take in this explainer from David Roberts over in Vox. Maybe we can share that after the break. It's been real interesting, and I guess maybe now would be a good time to tease about getting around to the policing question, because I also happen to see another of the Vox folks out there putting out an opinion and then retracting it, to his great credit, about the idea of, now in circulation, of abolition of police departments, or at least major league reform of how we do our policing, being floated out there and sort of being dismissed offhand as, hey, that's stupid. Has anybody really thought this through? And it really did an injustice to the people who had. We'll talk about that too. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see, unsure which direction to turn here. I teased two different topics that we need some time for, but maybe we spend some time with David Roberts' piece here. I like the premise in the headline here we should look into. The real problem with the New York Times op-ed page, it's not honest about U.S. conservatism, although I think Michelle kind of hit on the idea here, which is to say that the problem is that it hacks the system, that it pretends that conservatism is, at this point, the state that it's in is still a legitimate mainstream viewpoint that has to be dealt with in the marketplace of ideas, and it really isn't and shouldn't be. But let's see. In addition to that, I guess I'll note the fact that apparently the New York Times has since backed off of this thing. There was a real vicious fight going on, the intramural fight, in which some of the old school, I suppose, inside the New York Times was defending the whole thing under freedom of speech and marketplace of ideas thinking, which I think is outmoded, but it's difficult to convince people of that. But apparently they've since backed off, but offered varying excuses. I happened to see the TPM tweet go by to link to their story. New York Times declares Cotton's warlike op-ed against protests, quote, did not meet our standards. I guess at some point the story became, we didn't really read the thing all that closely, and then we rushed it out and printed it. But now apparently some right-wing publications, I think NRO, was saying, no, you didn't rush it. You took your time. You had plenty of time, and this excuse isn't a valid excuse. So now we have to look into exactly what the hell's going on at the New York Times and who's pushing it internally, et cetera, et cetera. I think it'll probably be hashed out over the weekend. Maybe we can return to it on Monday. In the meantime, let's see. I'll just note that for the record, and I'll show you the TPM story in today's roundup. But again, David Roberts over in Fox. It wants to challenge its readers, the New York Times does, but not with the ugly truth. That's what he says the problem is. The New York Times editorial page has come in for a great deal of criticism since it fell under the leadership of James Bennett, previously editor at The Atlantic. in March 2016. Most recently, new hire, and always in trouble with everybody I know, Barry Weiss, linked to a fake Twitter account as virtually her only evidence of a column, or in a column, devoted to the supposed epidemic of totalitarianism sweeping U.S. universities. That is the safe space thing, and that all of the real authoritarians are the leftists on college campuses who don't want people to be able to invade people's space and scream about rape in their face and whatnot. Anyway, before that was the controversy over hiring and then quickly firing Quinn Norton, who is friends with a Nazi. Yeah, that was kind of a weird thing. I almost forgot about that one. Then there was the controversy over hiring Bret Stephens, a climate denier and Woody Allen apologist. Then there was the controversy over the op-ed and press release by Eric Prince of the security contractor Blackwater. All linked in here in case you've forgotten any of them, and so on and so on. And David Uberti, U-B-E-R-T-I, at Splinter has a nice rundown of the various fights, along with some trenchant critique. The newspaper's defense, articulated repeatedly by Bennett, news editor Dean Baquet, and one-time ombudsman Liz Spade, is that the paper is pursuing diversity of opinion, attempting to challenge its readers. Didn't we learn from this past election that our goal should be to understand different views? Asked Baquet. That defense doesn't hold up to much scrutiny. As I said in the column on Stevens last year, it takes a particular sort of insularity to hire a pro-war, anti-Trump white guy as a contribution to diversity on the New York Times editorial page. Good point. In one of his characteristically scathing columns, Glenn Greenwald, that's going to raise hackles, notes that the Times editorial stable currently contains only 3 women and no Arab American or Latinx voices. I got to get back to that subject since we were talking about Gil. He's got a very maybe I'll just throw it in the summary so that everybody gets a chance to see it. I'm not going to get a chance to read it, but it really needs time. Although maybe we can convince Gil to read it and so we can play it at some point. But he's Latino himself, and has a real problem with the pronounceability, really. It's when we don't know what to say when we find Latinx having to be pronounced out loud, and I guess we say it like this. But he's got another solution, another suggestion in mind, and I've had that in my back pocket since forever. And Trump has made it impossible to give time to things like that. It's really, but I'll link it. He's got the whole thing written up as an essay at Daily Kos, so you should all take a look at that if that has been troubling you. Everyone I've shown it to in all the time I've been holding it in pocket has said, this is brilliant. We should be doing this. I wish we could do, and I guess if I had the time to push it, maybe that would help. Anyway, I'll go on to say, you know what? Let me skip down a bit here in David's essay. It's a long one, and I'm thinking you probably get the gist of it from Michelle Goldberg and the headings of the sections he has here. The New York Times, the next section begins, carries some conservatives, but it does not reflect conservative politics. Right? What he's winding up here in the previous section is representing what lies to the right of those confines, I guess, of mainstream discussion, is a different and more difficult matter. The New York Times carries some conservatives, but doesn't reflect conservative politics. The Times has always had its own generally liberal editorials, but the opinion page was established in 1970 to provide a venue for a wider range of opinions. Points of view in disagreement with the editorial positions of the Times, said publisher Arthur Sulzberger, will be particularly welcomed. And still today, Bennett wrote to Splinter, we're looking to challenge our own and our readers' assumptions. Recently, that concern has taken on a new edge. The traumatic and unexpected 2016 victory of Donald Trump convinced a great many people in elite political circles that they are hopelessly out of touch. There's a whole parallel country of which they are only dimly aware, and they urgently need to understand the perspectives of the people who rallied behind Trump. This has led to entire subgenres of news journalism, like rural white people are very upset, or Trump supporters still like Trump, or get to know this Nazi, he's just like you and me. All linked, by the way, in case you forgot who those examples are. But it's a different dilemma for the opinion page. Bennett clearly believes liberals live in a bubble. He wants to challenge them. It still hasn't occurred to him to challenge them from the left, so he goes out looking for more conservatives. And that's an important point, right? I mean, they could easily be challenged from the left. As a matter of fact, the hot topic of the moment that I really wanted to transition to, what to do about police departments, is challenging people from the left all over the place. People who are very progressive allies who say, this is going to turn off Americans. It's going to lose us the election. And I understand their concerns. And I don't know, I guess anything's possible. Although it does occur to me that I remember that somebody said to me, this is going to turn off everybody. It's doing so much damage by talking about abolishing police. People turn off instantly. Yeah. And I did say, I remember when we were all killed because somebody said abolish ICE. That didn't happen, right? The abolishment didn't happen, and neither did everything. Neither did us losing all the elections. So, you take it with a grain of salt. Anyway, let's see. There's some good points being made here by David in his piece, and I don't want to skip them, but I do want to get on to some other pieces too. So do read what he has to say. He's making a good point. His headers really do the work here. The Times carries some conservatives, but doesn't reflect conservative politics. Conservatism is now Trumpism, so printing the never Trumpers doesn't really get at things either. That's the diversity of that opinion is what they've been running with, but it exists elsewhere. Trumpist conservatism is motivated not by ideas but by resentments, and that's one of the other problems. You can't share ideas if there aren't any. The New York Times cannot host true conservatism because true conservatism does not share its standards. Right? It doesn't meet our standards is what they're saying this morning. And I think that was even before they put that word out. David had hit on that. It's true that the Times readers have been insulated from contemporary conservatism. That's true. And he calls for an end to that, but maybe I guess as reporting rather than legitimizing it with a place on the op-ed page. So I recommend that we all spend some time with Dave Roberts' piece here just to catch up on things. But I think between Michelle and David, they make a pretty good argument here about what we should be thinking about the New York Times if we're not just automatically outraged like we all imagine Armando to be. And I think he's about right on that as well. By the way, on the note of crazed conspiracy theories about Antifa super soldiers, James O'Keefe has inserted himself back in the story as well. I happen to have a write-up here from the Daily Dot in which I guess he's got another video out in which one of his undercover investigators has discovered Antifa super secret headquarters. And it's right here, and here's some video, and it's an interesting tale as usual. And as it turns out, it's taking place in a bookstore is it in Portland, Oregon, or is it just... Yeah, I guess so. Rose City Antifa, apparently, he's claiming had their secret headquarters here, but the bookstore is closed and has been for 2 years. And also, as it turns out, by the way, all that video of the bookstore it's used as the setting of the show Portlandia with Fred Armisen on TV. And so, the whole thing's a joke. Essentially, he slapped together another stupid video along with blurry undercover camera footage taken like 3 or 4 years ago before the place closed. And, he's attempting to pull a fast one once again. And you should be aware of that. You can read up on it for all the most ridiculous details if you like. I'll provide you a link to that one as well. Just another one in the bus of Antifa, I'm giving it now that affectation, super soldiers to file along with it. All right, let's see. All right, maybe over to the police story, although as I scroll by, I have to let you know that Trump has been tweeting allegedly over the past couple of days about his intention to pardon Roger Stone. That once again back in the news, and people making good observations about maybe the wrong message in the middle of the protests against the dual justice systems that we maintain in this country, that white friends of the president will have their crimes pardoned, whereas black and brown people, and increasingly white people as well, will be charged with rioting for having the temerity to put their heads underneath police truncheons. Anyway, let's see. Police in general. Where do we go here? Let me get up to the top here and scroll backwards and see if we can trace this back here. I've got a couple of, I thought I had some stuff available that was more readily accessible than this, but about what to do next, I guess, about police. Let's see, where's this? Not certain why it's not as evident as it was a few minutes ago, and I thought I had already opened the piece. Now I'm wasting my own time here. Let's see. Is it this one? I've one of the big problems now with the way Pocket displays tweets is it's impossible to tell which one is which. Okay. I know that here we are. There's a piece here from the New Republic that I think will be one of the better approaches maybe at summarizing what's going on. I haven't been able to read all the way through it, but just from the headline, the police were a mistake. That's this might be good foundational stuff for what people are arguing about whether or not policing ought to be reimagined or abolished or replaced with some other model. It is possible to, it's very difficult to conceive of what would we do? How would we stop crime? How do we hold criminals accountable? And I guess it's just you have to start from the assumption it's not necessarily the case that we need to deputize people with, not that extensive in the way, not that extensive training, and then arm them, and then the non-lethal weaponry, and that every response to every gathering, even if it is in fact impeding traffic, has to be beating the crap out of everybody and forcing them to submit to the overwhelming force and the ability to charge you with a crime if you fight back against brutalization. Maybe there could be a different approach. Matt Ford wrote this piece in the New Republic. The police were a mistake. Law enforcement agencies have become the standing armies that the founders feared. All right. What to do about it? Well, there may or may not be word on that in here, but this is a foundational piece, it seems like. Contrary to most of American folklore, and by the way, I should premise this by saying, when I say it's foundational for me, who are just people like me who are coming to this idea now. As I said, the dismissal of the idea of abolishing the police is as foolish and flighty, and it hasn't been thought through. Did do a great injustice to people who actually have been working on this issue and thinking it through for a very long time. I'm not one of them. And this piece from June 2nd isn't foundational necessarily in the sense that it's the beginning of the idea. It's just it'll help, I think, give us a background in its foundation. And I don't know whether Matt Ford is late to this idea or not, but here's what I've got in front of me. Contrary to most American folklore, the founding fathers were not a supernaturally wise monolith. Leading revolutionary figures like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton may have shared certain broad values, such as a commitment to republicanism, but they often passionately disagreed about what exactly the new nation's political system should look like. The Constitution that they ultimately wrote is more of a compromise between those differences than a perfect resolution to them. One issue where the founders were virtually unanimous, however, was their fear of standing armies. From Julius Caesar's legions at the Rubicon to Oliver Cromwell's new model army to the forces mustered by European monarchies, large armed forces in peacetime invariably threaten a free people's rights. Many of the 13 colonies' post-independence constitutions included declarations that standing armies are dangerous to liberty and they ought not to be kept up. John Adams warned that they should be watched with a jealous eye, while Thomas Jefferson referred to them as an engine of oppression. Those fears deeply influenced the Constitution, which includes multiple tools for Congress and the President to keep the military under civilian control. A standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty, Madison said in a speech to the Constitutional Convention. The means of defense against foreign danger have always been the instruments of tyranny at home. Among the Romans, it was a standing maxim to excite a war whenever a revolt was apprehended. Throughout all Europe, the armies kept up under the pretext of defending have enslaved the people. Those fears took on new meaning as civil unrest spread throughout the country over the last several days. Tens of thousands of Americans took to the streets to protest the death of George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man who was brutally killed by 4 Minneapolis police officers last week, and the culture of police brutality and militarism that has permitted a long list of similar killings. In response, police officers in cities across the country have largely responded violently, with abusive and authoritarian tactics. Social media networks are flooded with footage and accounts of cops shoving elderly pedestrians and innocent bystanders into pavement, bludgeoning journalists or pelting them with rubber bullets, and dispersing lawful crowds with tear gas and overwhelming force. Modern American policing, the militarized police departments, the heavy-handed enforcement of minor laws, the deep-rooted racial inequalities, the resistance to firm civilian control, has existed for so long that it's easy to assume it's the natural state of our society. In fact, this form of law enforcement is essentially a policy experiment, and a failed one at that. The American constitutional order is not designed to reform and supervise what are effectively armed paramilitary forces in every major city. Eventually, perhaps already, one will have to bend to the other. There are now more than 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, including according to the Bureau of Justice statistics. Most of them are small parochial institutions that range from county sheriff's offices and small-town police departments to tribal police forces and state park rangers. Some are behemoths. I have my own army at the NYPD, which is the 7th biggest army in the world, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg boasted in 2011. His claim is only a slight exaggeration. The New York City Police Department currently includes more than 36,000 uniformed officers, more than double the size of the State National Guard. It maintains its own Navy, Air Force, and intelligence service. This level of social control and management would have been alien to Americans for a large portion of this country's history. Early American communities did not have a police force, at least not in any form their modern-day counterparts might recognize. Most towns and cities relied upon a night watch to keep the peace after sunset, as well as constables and sheriffs to enforce court orders, execute warrants, and deliver summonses. Southern police departments can also trace their genealogy to slave patrols, which helped maintain the institution of slavery before the Civil War with the full force of government power. American cities would not move toward professionalized and uniformed police forces until the 1830s and 1840s, starting with cities like Boston and Philadelphia. They drew inspiration from London, where Home Secretary Robert Peel had led the creation of the Metropolitan Police in 1829. Historians often frame Peel's work in the context of London's population growth and a move toward Victorian-era social and moral reform. It also took place against the backdrop of social and political tensions over Irish nationalism, labor reform, and Catholic emancipation. The new force faced hostility from the Whigs, from magistrates, and from parish councils whose jurisdiction the act appeared to infringe. Adam Zamoyski wrote in his book Phantom Terror, which documents the paranoia among European counter-revolutionary leaders after the Napoleonic Wars. It was widely denounced as an attack on civil liberties, an attempt by the government to establish a private army and introduce espionage into the country, and is thoroughly un-English. When they first appeared on the streets in their blue uniforms and top hats, blue tailcoats and white ducks in summer, their only weapon a rattle and a truncheon, the members of the new force were either ridiculed with epithets such as peelers, bobbies, raw lobsters, and Jenny Darbies. That would be a anglicization of gendarmes, Jenny Darbies, or vilified as oppressors and spies. Creating American police forces would be no less controversial. In the 1830s and 40s, New York City was regularly racked by riots and crime waves. Local constables were either unwilling or unable to impose any sort of order upon the burgeoning metropolis. Reformers and some newspapers demanded action from their elected officials, but local leaders firmly resisted creating any force that would resemble the British military occupation during the Revolution, which still lingered in public memory. That sour feeling continued to be felt for generations, and the people saw the proposed police force as another occupying army loyal to the mayor and not to the residents. Historian Bruce Chadwick wrote in Law and Disorder, his history of the NYPD's tumultuous 19th century origins. New Yorkers and people throughout the country also feared the enormous cost of a large and professional force. The country had just staggered through 2 recessions and the financially catastrophic Panic of 1837. Citizens were careful with every penny of public expenditures, and the police force would cost a lot of money. A defining principle of the American democracy is civilian control of the military, that every general and admiral answers to the president at all times and can be dismissed by him for any reason. State and local leaders, by comparison, often wield substantially less influence. Even in cities where reform-minded mayors win higher office, they can find themselves subsumed by the combined influence of police unions, prosecutors, and other forces that favor the status quo. Federal influence, which was already sporadic, is now waning fast. Under President Donald Trump and his attorneys general, the Justice Department largely abandoned its efforts to reform local police departments through consent decrees and other civil rights tools. Perhaps the most glaring instance of how mayors can be undermined by police comes from New York City. Bill de Blasio took office in 2014 after campaigning against NYPD abuses under his predecessor, Bloomberg, including the city's infamous stop and frisk policy that largely singled out young black and Hispanic men. After a grand jury refused to indict NYPD officer Eric Pantaleo in December of 2014 for the killing of Eric Garner, de Blasio gave a speech on the incident in which he noted that he and his wife had often talked with their biracial son about why he should be cautious around police. De Blasio's remarks infuriated NYPD officers, and perhaps more importantly, the powerful police unions that represent them. After a gunman killed 2 of the department's officers in a targeted attack later that month, hundreds of police officers turned their backs on the mayor during his eulogy at a memorial service. The rebuke reportedly damaged de Blasio's willingness to challenge his city's police department, and he steadily became one of the NYPD's highest-profile defenders. In recent days, he said NYPD officers had acted appropriately, even as footage and accounts showed persistent abuses. His reversal hasn't even seemed to earn him any favor among the officers. After his daughter, Chiara, was arrested at a protest over the weekend, the Sergeants Benevolent Association posted her personal information and arrest record on Twitter. Other institutional hurdles stand between elected officials and police oversight. One of the paradoxes of modern policing is that the officials best equipped to violate an American's rights also receive the most legal protections from scrutiny and accountability when it happens. Derek Chauvin, right? The Minneapolis officer who killed George Floyd has received at least 17 misconduct complaints in the course of his tenure. Had his career been derailed by any of them, Floyd would be alive today. Police unions often negotiate contracts that require complaint records to be regularly purged from local databases, delay investigation into misconduct, and limit civilian leadership's ability to fire officers who are found culpable. On the few occasions where officers are actually kicked off the force, they're often hired by departments in other cities that aren't aware of their previous work history. Courts have added other barriers to police accountability. In theory, state and local government officials can be sued in federal court for violating a person's civil rights under Section 1983, a key provision of the Civil Rights Act of 1871. But the Supreme Court has steadily curtailed Section 1983's scope with a judicial doctrine known as qualified immunity, which shields the police and other officials from lawsuits under certain circumstances. In recent years, the court has made it even easier for courts to dismiss Section 1983 cases against cops in particular. Though the rulings have drawn criticism across the ideological spectrum, the justices appear no closer to changing course. That sense of impunity compounds other problems. For one, police officers in many large American cities don't actually live in the neighborhoods they police. In 2014, for instance, 538 found that in Minneapolis, only 10% of officers and only 5% of white officers actually lived in the city limits. The NYPD has even got a rule that uniformed officers aren't allowed to live in the precinct where they work, meaning that the city's communities aren't patrolled by people who actually live there. When residents in these communities feel like they're being over-policed by an outside force, over which they have no control, it's because they are. Well, I don't think I'll be able to get to the balance of the article, but I think you get a pretty good idea of where Ford is going, explaining to us, once again, it becomes necessary, that history being the guide here, it's not the case that we've always had this model of police, everything, whether the police departments, the immunity that they enjoy from accountability, not to mention the weaponry that they've got. All of these things are policy decisions that can and should at some point be reversed, and it's not an impossibility to reimagine how things might go. It doesn't have any, I don't think, proactive suggestions for what might replace it, but there's plenty of writing on that too. Perhaps we can dig up and share some of that in the weeks to come, just so that we can be prepared to be a part of that debate. Lots to come, of course. Justice has got the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next, and maybe the thing to do is just jump over there and give you a preview of what's going on while we still have the time to do it. So much more I wanted to get to. Maybe he's got it on his agenda. Let's see. Vast majorities disapprove of Trump's handling of the pandemic. Did you know that? Yes. And his response to the George Floyd protests. Portland, Oregon is kicking out all the cops in all of the city's schools. The ACLU filed suit against the Trump administration for forcibly removing protesters for his Bible photo op. And with the jobs report cooked by the Labor Department, in the real world, JCPenney is closing 154 stores.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Lots from overseas as well, where coronavirus is spreading fast among Brazil's indigenous tribes, with a 5-fold jump in deaths in the last month. And the Gavi Vaccines Alliance raised $8.8 billion for immunization plans through 2025 for poor countries. All that and more next with Justice Putnam.